want to welcome today David Thomas to our podcast and YouTube channel. I'm very excited to interview him. Just a little bit about David. David is the director of family counseling at Daystar Counseling in Nashville. He is the co-author of 10 books. I was taking a look at the books. They're pretty amazing. One of them is actually a award-winning book. It's called Wild Things: The Art of Nurturing Boys, and another one is Are My Kids on Track as well. He speaks regularly around the country and is a frequent guest on podcasts and television shows. And he actually also has a major podcast that has over 2 million downloads to date, and it's called Raising Boys and Girls. He co-hosts with Cece Golf, right? Is that your partner as well at Daystar?
Yes, she has been a colleague of mine for over 25 years now, and I love sharing that time and space with her at the podcast.
Awesome. And she actually also wrote the foreword to your first single authorship book. So we're talking about his latest project. It's called Raising Emotionally Strong Boys. It's his first book that he authors just by himself. So very, very important work based on 25 years of counseling boys and their families as well. And it is a subject that is very important this day and time when we hear so much about masculinizing girls and feminizing boys, and we need to find that balance, right? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Thomas also and his wife Connie, they have a daughter and 2 twin sons. So he also comes from a perspective of being a parent of boys. Oh my goodness, 2 twin sons. God bless you, David.
Thank you for that. I'll take it.
And we can't forget his yellow lab. They're very important. Owen. So we're going to, of course, include all the information about his book, his podcast, and everything in the show notes. I'll be also writing a column for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about this very important subject. Well, without further ado, I want to dive right into the subject of your book, Raising Emotionally Strong Boys. I was reading a little bit about this, that we in 2020, in a rare public advisory, the U.S. Journal General warned of a devastating mental health crisis among adolescents. Numerous hospitals and doctors groups have called it a national emergency, citing rising levels of mental illness, a severe shortage of therapists and treatment options, and insufficient research to explain the trend. This was released at the New York Times. Tell me a little bit about this rising issue in our society.
Yes. I would say first off that if we even look back a couple of years before that warning, back all the way to 2018, pre-pandemic, we were seeing rising rates of anxiety and depression with kids and adolescents like we had never seen at any other time in history. In fact, anxiety had been declared a childhood epidemic in our country. Our numbers were so high. And so when we did the research for my previous book, Are My Kids on Track, the statistic at that time, and this would have been back around 2014, 2015, was that 1 in 8 kids would struggle. If we jump forward to pre-pandemic, we had moved already to 1 in 4. And now the current status 1 in 3, with the suspicion that if we keep trending in the direction we're going, it will be every other adolescent at some point along the way that's struggling in that space. And I think what the pandemic did for all of us, not just for the pediatric population, but for all of us, was put a spotlight on these areas and the evidence that we just aren't doing enough to really equip kids, adolescents, and adults with the needed skills and resources so that we can navigate difficult times in our world. Obviously, hoping we never experience anything again like the pandemic,
Mhm.
but even just the everyday. And again, if we think back to those stats pre-pandemic, we were in a complicated time in the world already, and it's
Absolutely.
only gotten more complicated. So, though I am overwhelmed by that warning, I'm grateful that I think it has put the spotlight, both that warning and the pandemic itself, on this needed conversation and
Mhm.
allowing us both as parents and educators and clinicians to really be thinking about what else do we need to be doing, which is some
Mhm.
of why this book felt so important to write.
Absolutely. And we hear it. I'm a mother of two girls, so I have no experience with boys as far as raising boys. I have a brother, of course, and I remember, a lot of things that you address in your book, the communication of their issues, of their problems with outbursts of anger instead of
Yes.
actually dealing with the issues, and we read so much about addressing emotional stability in girls, because girls are, they were we were raised, I mean, we come from generations of raising that girls are okay, it's okay for a girl to be emotional. But now
Yes.
we're having all this, the issues with boys where, they don't know how to manage their emotions. And
Yes.
so tell me, how did that come to you? Like, I know evidently God put a spotlight on this issue for you in your clinic and with your patients. How did that come about?
I think for me, one of the strongest reminders of the importance of this content comes from having done this work for 25 years. I couldn't begin to tell you how common it is that we will have families seek us out in our practice who are navigating separation or divorce. That's some of what brought them to us. And having had an opportunity to sit front row to that transition with family for decades now, and noticing how often, not always, but how often the circumstances that brought a couple to that place involved a man having an affair,
Mhm.
engaging addiction. I could run down a lengthy list of all these statistics that confirm for us these places where adult men lead some of the scariest stats out there. Men lead the statistics for infidelity, internet pornography, addiction, substance abuse, self harm, suicide. These really scary places, the common denominator being that they are working so hard to try to numb out
Mhm.
whatever it is that they're feeling. And then it shows up in these really scary, destructive places. And not only have I seen that story play out time and time again, but I then see the residual effect, the impact of what that looks like on kids and adolescents when the family navigates that chapter within a story. And so I think it, for me, was part of that Frederick Douglass quote of, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And I
Oh,
think I've
wow.
sat in a room with so many broken men, so many
Mhm.
broken families time and time again. And I just wanted to be able to say, I've done everything I know to do on my watch to build strong boys on the front side who
Mhm.
know how to work through their emotions, as you well described, rather than reaching this place in adulthood where they're working so hard to numb it out and finding themselves in these scary places and wreaking havoc on a family, the
Mhm.
residual of all of that on a wife and on children. So that was part of the great passion for me in writing this book. And, I end the book with that great Desmond Tutu quote where, we talk about at some point, we don't want to just be pulling people out of the river, but we want to go downstream and identify what's happening on the front side that we could be doing differently. And that's really the heart of this book.
That's beautiful. And I just think about, like, we are children of the baby boomers, the greatest generation, as we say. And so you and I think they were probably close to ages. So our parents are probably
Yes.
about the same age. So we were raised by men who came from the war, right? And
Yes.
they had to, I mean, they went through so much as pretty much kids, and they had to numb feelings. And I really believe that our society today is a reflection of just that. It was
I
a
agree.
generation that they really had no option. They had to just buckle up and step up
Absolutely.
and rebuild the world, really,
Yes.
after the Second
Yes.
World War. And now it seems like it is time again for us, I guess the beauty of all of these issues surfacing in our society is that it gives room for people like you and others who are lifting their flag and saying, hey, enough is enough. We need to care for these boys. They are human. They
Yes.
have emotions. And I love that you guys are that you are addressing that, because
Thank you.
I also even again, because we were raised in that type of mentality. um some friends of mine who have boys, there's still a lot of the mentality of just toughen up, just toughen up, just.
Absolutely.
So how unhealthy is that, David, when a parent or when a society tells boys that, you know what, just shut up and toughen up?
I think it is both unhealthy and incredibly harmful, and why those statistics exist. In fact, the scariest statistic that I came across in doing the research for this book is that currently, globally, on average, one man dies by suicide every minute of every day. And
That's crazy.
I could barely write those words as I
Yeah.
was creating the book. I can barely say those words. It's overwhelming to me to think that we've reached that place and that point. And one of the definitions that I remember studying in graduate school back when I was doing my training 30 years ago was that, suicide is believing that my pain exceeds my resources,
Hmm.
that a person's pain exceeds their resources. And I don't want another boy or girl to grow up believing that their pain is greater than the resources around them. But I think it has to start with, to the conversation we're sharing, training boys that it is good and healthy to name their emotions, to be
Mm-hmm.
able to articulate their experience, and to ask for help. I sat with a dad recently who said, David, I was raised my entire life by men who I realize now were always communicating to me some version of don't feel and don't ask for help. And he said,
Mm.
I absorb those messages culturally. I think we send those messages regularly to boys. And so here I am, a husband and a father myself, and I see all of how that has hindered me in those roles. And I think I've got to learn these skills myself before I could ever hope to teach them to my son. And I loved his words. And it's certainly the heart of what I hope to communicate, even in the introduction of this book. Of I want any parent reading or any parent listening right now to know that if that's your story, and I think it is the story of many adults. I
Yeah.
didn't grow up in a home where we talked openly about our feelings, where my parents were modeling for me what it looks like to navigate my emotional experience, that we can learn alongside our kids. That it turns out that age old saying of you can't teach an old dog new tricks is actually not true. We can learn new tricks.
Yeah.
It may be a little harder because we've been practicing in a direction that, as you and I are discussing, was not healthy or helpful, but we can learn new ways of being in this world. And then, to the degree
Absolutely.
that we're learning and practicing those things, we can offer so much more to the kids we love.
Yes, that's beautiful. And this book is full of these resources, and we're just tapping a little bit of it. But I just love that you started the book. That you started the book like you gave that example of the Incredible Hulk, and it couldn't be a better illustration
Right.
to show the public like exactly how boys deal with their emotions. And I'm gonna quote here what you said. You said. I think that many boys relate to the Incredible Hulk because they understand the tension of wanting to do good in the world while battling the monster inside. They know the impact of stress and what it's like when it comes our side out sideways. Sorry, they understand emotional evolving into a transformation with an undesired outcome. I think the moms of boys and dads can so relate to that. But then you talk about the 3 R's. And I want
Yes.
you to just tell our audience a little bit about the 3 R's that all emotionally healthy boys must face.
Yes. Thank you for letting me talk about those. I believe in them strongly. And I think these 3 R's are really the foundation of building emotionally strong boys. And the first R is recognize. So it's learning to pay better attention to the signs and signals our body gives us when emotions register in the brain and body. And I introduce that to boys often, kind of like the dashboard of a car, that, our car will signal us if the tire is low and needs some air, or if the oil needs changing, or if the check engine light comes on, something more significant may be at play. And if we pay attention to those things and attend to them, the car keeps running efficiently. If we don't, we can do some real damage to the vehicle. If I get a check the air in your tire light long enough and I don't pay attention to that, I'm going to end up on the side of the road with a flat tire. And so that's really the first R of recognize. The second R is regulate. And it is developing healthy coping skills so that I can bring the nervous system from this heightened state of arousal down to a place of calm. I talk about it, kind of the Cliff Notes version of that is moving from stress to settled, or moving from chaos to calm, and developing skills to do that. And then the third R is repair. And that is taking ownership and doing any needed relational work. And I believe if we don't teach that third R, what I have experienced time and time again, week to week, day to day, sometimes hour to hour in my office, is that boys just swing between blame and shame. In fact, research would tell us that in the face of failure, girls and females tend to blame themselves. They point the finger this direction, but boys tend to point the finger out. They blame mothers. And in fact, one of the definitions of blame is discharge pain. So it's that hurt on the inside of me that I'm trying to turn on someone else, as opposed to developing healthy ownership. And I even give the example sometimes to hopefully make a little more sense, that I think if we were to think about that progression of blame, shame, and ownership, that blame with boys are statements like, it's her fault, or my teacher didn't teach it the right way, or my coach just isn't giving me enough playing time. Shame is statements that are full of self-contempt, like, I'm such an idiot. I'm the worst member of this family. I'm the dumbest kid in my class. I'm the worst player on my team. Whereas ownership looks like, you know what? I didn't study hard enough for that test, but I get another try on Friday. Or my coach did encourage me to practice 30 minutes a day, and I haven't been doing that, but I want to now. So you see the difference between just staying stuck in those blame statements, those shame statements, as opposed to moving toward some healthy ownership. So teaching those 3 R's and modeling those 3 R's is some of the most important work that I think we will do as parents and educators and people who care for children.
What a great resource for parents, because a lot of times, with girls, I know that when the responses are, the reactions or the responses happen, you don't know sometimes how to address it. And giving these 3 R's is just they are valuable tools. Not just this, but this book is filled with valuable tools that will help parents to navigate those emotions in a healthy way, and making boys understand that that's part of our makeup, how God made us to be. And that's incredible. And what are some of the ways that parents allow their boys sometimes to get trapped into these unhealthy emotions?
Yeah. It's interesting. I think one of the first ways that we do that is we culturally tend to believe, and sometimes even say, that girls have more emotions and boys have fewer. And there's actually no science to support that. There's none. Now, what is true is this: girls do have more words and more skills typically to articulate their experience, but they don't have more emotions. In fact, it's interesting when we think back on early pediatric visits, well visits, at 12, 18, 24 months, when the pediatrician's going to ask parents, how many words is she saying? How many words is he saying? What we know to be true is that girls are saying often 2 to 3 times as many words as boys. So if her general vocabulary is larger, of course, her emotional vocabulary would likely be larger. So we're going to have to labor longer to help boys develop what I call an expansive emotional vocabulary, so that he can identify what he feels. The second thing, which you spoke so well to a little earlier, is that somewhere around 9 to 10, boys begin to channel all primary emotions: fear, sadness, disappointment, confusion, into anger. And I think culturally we support that. We say it's okay for boys to be angry. It's not okay to be sad or scared, but it's okay for girls to be sad and scared. And so we're really going to have to labor long in developing an emotional vocabulary and change the cultural messages. And then lastly, I would say, I think there are a lot of messages throughout a boy's development that are coming at him that confirm that messaging of don't feel and don't ask for help. I think about the classic message, man up. And if we really think about it, every time we say man up to a boy, on some level, we are saying stop feeling and take care of things on your own. Don't ask for help. And so I really want to challenge us to think about all the ways we address boys. Research would tell us that parents are more likely to say to boys, stop crying, than they would to girls, which again is that message of it's not good to be sad. It's not okay to feel big feelings. And so I want to replace all that messaging of don't feel with let's work it through. I can tell you're having big feelings. Let's work it through. And then again, helping boys develop the words and the skills to actually do that.
I love that. This is a very unique time in our society for Christian parents, David. We are hearing so much about gender neutrality. We hear about feminizing boys, masculinizing girls. I just read a report about a preschool in Sweden that they are trying to do that, the whole gender neutrality. And so they separate the boys and the girls, and then boys have to do dance lessons and the girls have yelling sessions. So such an unhealthy way of addressing the unique need for boys and girls to have healthy emotions, but still owning their role as men and women.
Absolutely.
As God made them to be. I love it that in your book, you address Jesus as the perfect role of an emotionally stable leader, and he's our savior and our role model. This should be. You said Jesus' strength was founded in tenderness, compassion, mercy, and love. Tell me how you portray Jesus as the perfect example of an emotionally stable man.
Yes, absolutely. And the greatest man who ever walked the earth, the man that we most want to be emulating. And, I would challenge parents to think about all the accounts in scripture where Jesus in his humanity felt everything we're going to feel. Think about his encounter with his dear friend Mary and the loss of her brother Lazarus, who was also his friend. We're told he wept. And that the people around him could see how deeply moved he was. That's what the scripture tells us. And so think about his encounter with the disciples in the garden when we're told he felt lonely and scared. And he said, stay awake with me. And they fell asleep anyway. He felt betrayal. And so all these accounts of where Jesus in his humanity felt these different things in the temple with the tax collectors, when he discovers they're not using the space as it was intended to be used. And we're told he felt anger. And so these emotions are things every boy, every male is going to feel throughout his life. And again, our job is just to help him name and navigate that. And I really do want to challenge men listening to say, I talk so much in the book to this very important point in our conversation that boys need to see more and more that emotions reside in the life of a man. And I think that happens in the everyday when we're sitting around the dinner table as families. I want boys to get to hear their dad say things like, you know what? I felt embarrassed today. I had to give a presentation to the board of directors and I didn't feel as prepared as I wanted to. I feel sad. I think I was really short-tempered with one of my coworkers and I want to go back and check in and apologize for that. Like this reporting that gives permission to boys to feel and to know that they're being fully masculine in all of those moments when they're experiencing those emotions, just as Jesus did.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was one of my favorite points in the book because it is so very true. Jesus was a very emotional, man, as in his manhood. He was a very emotional man that dealt with emotion and loved deeply and had compassion like no other. And that's why we can so relate to him as we read his words and everything. So I love that part. I want to ask you something about the relationship with the mother. So what are some of the unique ingredients for emotional strength that a boy needs from his mother? You mentioned something about boys a lot of times saying that it's her fault, meaning her mom's fault. I was a little surprised by that. I thought only girls thought that it was always mom's fault.
Boys do that too. In fact, it fascinates me how early that happens. I have a memory myself of one of my 5-year-old sons on a busy Saturday morning. We were trying to get out the door to their soccer game, couldn't find his soccer cleats, and walked up to my wife, his mom, and said, "What did you do with my soccer cleats?" That it never occurred to him to ask, "Did you see where I left them?" which would be ownership, or Do you know where they are? It never occurred to him. It was immediately the sense of you put them somewhere, as if my wife had worn them with her black dress the night before. So I laugh when I think back on that, but it's such a reminder of how early that instinct kicks in, I think, for
Mm,
boys. And that unless we interrupt that by teaching that third R, he'll simply stay stuck in that pattern of blame. Or when he blows it, my wife and I were on a walk last night, and she was telling me about a conversation with a girlfriend who has a 19-year-old son who made a mistake. And his only response was to look at his mom and just say, I'm such a disappointment. You probably wish I was never born. That shame swing, just that
mhm.
instinct of not getting to the healthy ownership. But I really would want to challenge moms in saying, not only do I think that pattern is important to interrupt, but the other thing that I talk a lot about are three important roles that I think a mom plays in a boy's life. And those three ingredients are what I call being safe, letting go, and staying steady. And in the chapter on moms and dads, I talk more about what each of those mean. But part of that being safe is that, in my experience, I think boys tend to give the most of who they are to their moms, which includes the
Mhm.
best of who they are and sometimes the worst of who they are. And not only that blame pattern, but I have seen boys create a long game of what I call emotional tug of war with their moms, that when
Mm.
they're struggling on the inside and they haven't learned to regulate, they'd rather use their mom as a regulation tool than developing the tools of self-regulation. And
Mm.
unless moms interrupt that pattern, they can stay in emotional tug of war long term. And then I think boys simply transfer the other end of the rope over to their girlfriends, their fiancés, and their
Wow.
wives some days. And they just stay in this long journey of always playing emotional tug of war and expecting the primary female in their life, to be their resources more than developing resourcefulness.
Wow. That's an interesting insight to me that kind of makes me understand a lot of. I'm just, as you're talking, I'm thinking about relationships. You know what um,
Yes.
either talking to friends about issues that they've had with husbands, or even, with my own husband, is just like you can see that. You can absolutely see
Yes.
that very true. And well, what about a father? How can a father that was raised to shut down their feelings, with, how can they deal with this emotional shift in
Yeah.
paradigm?
I think they play a primary role as well. And I talk about the three ingredients I really want dads to pay attention to, or what I call emotion, connection, and validation. And, the emotion piece involves some of what we've discussed in just modeling for boys what it
Mhm.
looks like to have different feelings show up and what they're doing to navigate that, and how important a role I think that plays as boys sit front row to the men they trust the most in this world. But the connection piece, I think, is equally important. In fact, when we were talking a little bit about the role of Jesus in being the perfect man that we want to model and emulate our life after, I also challenge dads to pay close attention to the fact that Jesus throughout his life walked in deep, intimate community.
Mhm.
He had intimate relationship with the disciples,
Yeah.
sharing life, washing feet, eating food, traveling together. We even have accounts where it's told they would lay their heads in his lap at different points along the
Mhm.
way. There
Very
was this
true.
intimate connection. And one of the things that I have done often over the years in my office is to ask boys a question of, hey, tell me, who are two or three of your mom's closest friends? And without hesitation, boys can almost always name at least two to three.
Mhm.
If I flip the question and say, who are two or three of your dad's closest friends? I can't tell you how often boys pause,
Yeah.
and sometimes can't get to two. And that's concerning to me, that boys see their moms modeling the importance of intimate relationship and community, but they don't always see that with their dads. And so
Yeah.
that's the other thing I want to challenge dads to model. Like, when you spend time with close friends, talk openly about that. When you go meet with your counselor, talk openly about that. Hey, I met with my counselor today, and he's helping me practice some things that I'm learning and I didn't know growing up that I thought could be helpful for you. And so
Mhm.
even just this Monday, I went on a long walk with my pastor, my dear friend, and I'm talking about it with my own kids who are now college age. Like, hey, I was with Carter this morning. He challenged me in a really amazing way. What do you think about this? And how much I think boys need to sit front row to those kinds of reportings as well, that are not only seeing emotions, but seeing evidence of intimate relationship and the benefit of that, which I think competes with that message of don't ask for help. I think that
Yes.
don't ask for help communicates you don't need other men. You've got this on
Right.
your own, or you should have this on your own. And no man should have this on their own. We aren't
No,
designed to live alone.
there's nothing better than a good girlfriend. So I'm sure it's the same thing with
Yes,
guys too. I mean,
absolutely.
sometimes it's like, no, I don't want to talk to my husband or my mom. I want to talk to my girlfriend. And I'm sure the guys have that need as well.
Absolutely.
You
I
know,
have 3 male friends in my life who have taught me more about what it means to be a man and a husband and a father than any other person in my existence. Absolutely. I've learned more
Mm.
from watching them, listening to them, confiding in them, all the things that you named. And again, I think boys need to hear that kind of reporting, but
That's
they
good.
can't hear that kind of reporting if men don't have those kinds of relationships. So
Very true.
that's where the starting point may be. Dad's really developing more depth in relationships so that they
Absolutely.
then have something to report.
Well, parents, I will tell you, this is a must read. I don't have boys. Raising Emotionally Strong Boys, Tools Your Son Can Build on for Life. This is a must read for every parent of boys, and I highly recommend it. I've read it. I don't have boys, but one day I'm hoping to have grandbabies. But just to finish a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about this awesome curriculum that came out of this
Thank
as
you.
well, which is actually for young boys, like elementary school age boys. It's a
Yes.
workbook for boys that's called Strong and Smart: A Boy's Guide to Building Healthy Emotions. So it kind of it's a I guess a child of this book, right?
It is. It's like a companion guide.
It's awesome. Tell me a little
Thank
bit.
you.
I looked at it. I think this is amazing. Tell me a little bit about it and and I want you to go ahead and tell me where people can find all these resources. Of course, I'll put all of this information on my show notes as well.
Thank you. Well, I'm grateful you let me talk about it. It felt important to me, as you heard me say how passionate I feel about this, to create as many resources to make this content come alive. I want parents to read this book and feel like this is user friendly. This is doable. This is something I could start tonight at the dinner table or at bedtime. And so I end every chapter of Raising Emotionally Strong Boys with 5 intentional practices. And then in the workbook, Strong and Smart, I want to talk about what it looks like to implement those practices with boys specifically in the elementary years. Now, as I say that, I will say I have had a lot of parents of preschool age boys in the 3 to 5 space who said they've gotten the workbook and are modifying it and
Mhm.
finding it really useful for younger boys. And I've had parents of some middle school and high school age boys say, we didn't teach these things early on and we're excited to implement those now. I laughingly had a conversation with a mom recently who has a 4th grade son. She said, David, I got the workbook for my 4th grade son, but I'm using it all the time with my 42-year-old husband. And I'm like, well, great.
Looks like we have to have some other books coming out of this book, right? Maybe you have
There
to
it
do
is.
teenagers now and then adult children and then your husband.
There it is. So if it's useful
Raising.
with any age male, let's go ahead and use it there.
Hey, we can only stop learning when we die, that's while we
Absolutely.
are so there's always room for improvement,
There
even when
is.
you feel like you are very emotionally stable. So
Agreed.
I love this is great information, great resources, and I'm sure that if people could all the families who need help could go to Nashville, it would be amazing to come and see you face to face. But we will connect my audience with your website and everything so that people can get all the resources. Thank you,
Thank you.
David, for this beautiful
Thank you.
work. Uh, the Christians and the secular world need this message very much, especially at this time. I think it's very timely, just as God does things. This is a very timely project. So I thank you on behalf of many mothers of boys that I know, and I'm sure that it will be a great gift for the kingdom and for everyone who reads it. So
You were incredibly kind to say that. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come on and talk about it today. I'm just so grateful. It was a pleasure to spend time with you, and just
thank
grateful for
you.
the work you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. And I'm just Godspeed to you in everything you do.
You as
Thank you
well.
again.
Thank you. Blessings on your day. Enjoy your summer.
You too.